A chance encounter. In the heat of a sweltering summer afternoon, Marcus Johnson sat beneath a sprawling oak in his local park, enjoying a rare break from the hustle of his life. The city around him was in the throes of one of the hottest days of the season, and people milled about, trying to escape the oppressive temperatures. Children chased one another across the grass. Vendors sold chilled lemonade to lines of sweaty patrons, and families gathered in whatever shade they could find. Marcus felt a rare moment of peace as he flipped through the pages of his book, savoring a quiet respite he seldom had as an EMT. Marcus was a man forged by the streets of the inner city, someone who had seen both the best and worst of humanity. Growing up in a community fraught with poverty and crime, he had witnessed the relentless cycle of hardship and heartache that so many were unable to escape. But Marcus had risen above it all, cultivating a heart that beat with resilience, a mind driven by compassion, and a spirit that believed in the potential for good. His work as an EMT brought him face to face with trauma on a daily basis, yet he never allowed the darkness to diminish his light. As he lost himself in his novel, his thoughts drifted to the faces of the people he had helped, each one reminding him why he had chosen this path. For Marcus, every shift was a chance to make a difference, however small, in a world that seemed to need all the kindness it could get. He was known in his community not only as a caregiver but as a role model, a pillar of strength and understanding for those who had few places to turn. Today was supposed to be about self-care, a day for him to recharge, unwind, and disconnect from the weight of his responsibilities. But as he turned another page, a commotion nearby snapped him out of his reverie. He looked up to see a woman yelling at a young Hispanic boy who looked no older than 10. The boy stood there, his small frame hunched in on itself, his eyes downcast, holding a soccer ball close to his chest. The woman's face was a mask of fury, twisted with an anger that seemed wildly disproportionate to the situation. Dressed in designer clothes, her posture radiated entitlement and impatience as her sharp voice cut through the peaceful atmosphere of the park. She gestured animatedly, her words growing louder, fueled by an indignation that seemed almost performative. The boy had accidentally bumped into her while chasing his ball, but instead of brushing off the incident, the woman had unleashed a tirade of insults, her voice laced with venomous racial slurs. Marcus felt his chest tighten. He set his book aside, his mind reeling with disbelief. Racism was no stranger to him. He had experienced it countless times, but each encounter stung like the first. Here was a woman, standing in broad daylight, spewing hatred at a child. For Marcus, this was more than just a display of prejudice. It was an attack on innocence. A little boy, no older than his own nephew, was being branded and belittled simply for existing. He could feel the familiar anger bubbling beneath the surface, a righteous indignation that called him to act. But Marcus was a man who believed in temperance, in keeping his cool even when the situation threatened to drag him into the depths of anger. He knew that responding with aggression would only add fuel to the fire. Instead, he took a deep breath, collecting himself as he rose to his feet. With steady, measured steps, Marcus approached the scene. The woman was so engrossed in her own fury that she didn't notice him at first. As he reached her, he spoke with a voice that was calm but firm, his tone laced with a quiet authority. "Excuse me, ma'am," he began, his voice cutting through her tirade like a blade of reason slicing through the chaos. "I couldn't help but overhear, and I think you might want to reconsider your choice of words." The woman whipped around, her eyes narrowing as she took in the sight of Marcus. Her expression shifted from outrage to disdain, and her lips curled into a sneer. "And who are you?" she spat, her tone dripping with condescension. "Mind your own business." "My name is Marcus," he replied evenly, refusing to rise to her bait. "And I believe that everyone deserves respect, regardless of their background or their age. This young man deserves better than this." The woman's sneer deepened, her eyes blazing with anger as she looked him up and down. "Respect," she echoed, her voice laced with contempt. "This little thug needs to learn some manners." He bumped into me without even apologizing. Marcus glanced at the boy, who was now visibly trembling, his eyes wide with. Marcus didn't expect to think much more about the encounter once the woman was taken away. The day had been emotionally charged, but he had done his duty, stepping in as an EMT and a compassionate human being, setting aside his feelings in the face of another's pain. Yet as he walked back home, his mind lingered on the intensity of the moment, on the vitriol in her words, and her transformation from rage to helplessness. He replayed her accusations in his mind, her sweeping statements about his kind, and her assumptions about his intentions. Even as he fought to push the scene from his thoughts, it felt like a thorn lodged deep within him, demanding his attention. Over the next few days, he attempted to move past the experience, pouring himself into his work. The city around him never ceased to keep him busy. Every shift on the ambulance was an opportunity to immerse himself in service, to save lives, to soothe those in pain, and to find fulfillment in the moments that truly mattered. His community trusted him, and he was known not only as an EMT, but as a source of hope and strength in times of crisis. Yet despite his best efforts to remain grounded in the present, news of the incident spread quickly. Social media posts began to circulate, fueled by videos and photos taken by bystanders in the park. The sight of Marcus performing CPR on the woman who had just insulted him struck a chord with the community. People shared the story, expressing admiration for his compassion, some even calling him a hero. As Marcus scrolled through the comments on various platforms, he noticed a recurring theme. People were touched by his actions, but also appalled by the woman's behavior. Many called for her to apologize publicly. Others expressed doubt that someone so hateful could change. At first, Marcus felt uncomfortable with the attention. He hadn't saved the woman for accolades. He had done it out of a duty that transcended personal feeling. But as the days passed, he began to realize that the encounter had struck a nerve far deeper than he'd anticipated. The incident had become a symbol of the city's ongoing struggle with prejudice and division. People debated fiercely in online forums and in local coffee shops, discussing the complexities of racism, forgiveness, and what it meant to treat others with kindness regardless of their behavior. The morning after the incident, Marcus was preparing to leave for his shift when his phone buzzed with a message from his supervisor. Curious, he opened it to find a request for a meeting later in the week. Marcus's heart sank as he wondered if this was related to the incident in the park. He couldn't imagine being reprimanded for saving someone's life, but the public nature of the event, combined with the volatile online reactions, made him uneasy. As he walked into the hospital for his shift, a colleague, Sarah Parker, caught his eye. Sarah was a seasoned nurse with a fierce dedication to patient care and a reputation for speaking her mind. She had seen the news, and her eyes lit up as she spotted Marcus. "Marcus, I've been waiting to catch you," she exclaimed, pulling him aside with a grin. "You're the talk of the town. I saw that video. What you did was incredible. A lot of people would have walked away, but you stayed and helped her, even after what she said." Marcus offered a modest smile, shrugging off the compliment. "It's just part of the job, Sarah. I was there, and she needed help. I couldn't just leave her." Sarah gave him a knowing look. "It's not about the job, Marcus. People see what you did, and it's bigger than just CPR. You showed everyone what compassion looks like, even when someone doesn't deserve it." Her words resonated with him, leaving Marcus deep in thought as he went about his duties. Was it truly compassion that had driven him to help her? Or was it merely habit, an automatic response to someone in distress? He pondered this as he tended to his patients, each encounter a reminder of the humanity he saw in every person he treated. 2 days later, Marcus met with his supervisor, Dr. Bennington, in a small conference room tucked away from the bustling hospital corridors. Dr. Bennington was a stern but fair man, known for his no-nonsense approach to leadership. As Marcus sat across from him, he could sense the weight of the conversation they were about to have. "Marcus," Dr. Bennington began, his expression thoughtful, "I wanted to discuss the incident that's been circulating online, The one in the park. Marcus nodded, feeling a mixture of anticipation and anxiety. Let me start by saying that what you did was remarkable. Not just as an EMT, but as a person. You kept your composure in a very tense situation, and you saved a life. Dr. Bennington continued. However, as I'm sure you've seen, this has stirred quite a bit of controversy. The hospital administration is supportive of your actions, but we need to be prepared for any potential fallout. There's a lot of discussion about forgiveness and prejudice, and as your supervisor, I wanted to make sure you're comfortable with the public attention this may continue to bring. Marcus took a deep breath, gathering his thoughts. To be honest, I didn't expect this to blow up the way it did. I just did what I thought was right. But if it brings attention to the issues our community faces, maybe that's a good thing. Dr. Bennington nodded approvingly. That's a noble perspective, Marcus. I'll be honest, I think your story has the potential to make a real impact. People need to see that compassion can exist in unexpected places. However, we'll respect whatever level of involvement you want in addressing this publicly. Just know that the hospital fully supports you. As Marcus left the meeting, he felt a sense of relief mixed with a hint of responsibility. The situation had taken on a life of its own, and he now stood at a crossroads. He could retreat from the spotlight, letting the public's interest fade naturally, or he could embrace the opportunity to address the underlying issues that had made this moment so charged. Later that evening, Marcus received an unexpected email from a local journalist, Sarah Miller, who specialized in social issues. Her writing often delved into the complexities of race, inequality, and justice, and her investigative pieces had earned her respect in the community. In her email, she expressed admiration for Marcus's actions and asked if he would consider an interview to discuss his perspective on the incident and his views on prejudice and forgiveness. Marcus was initially hesitant. He was a private person, someone who preferred to keep his life and work separate. But the idea of shedding light on issues that were close to his heart began to resonate with him. He decided to accept her offer, hoping that by sharing his experience, he could contribute to a larger conversation about empathy and understanding. 2 days later, they met in a small coffee shop not far from his neighborhood. Sarah was a sharp, engaging presence, and she immediately set him at ease. After a few pleasantries, she got right to the heart of the matter. Marcus, she began, leaning forward, the community is talking about what happened that day in the park. Some people are amazed by your restraint. Others are questioning the woman's motives, and many are wondering what you were thinking in that moment. So I have to ask, why did you choose to help her? Marcus took a sip of his coffee, gathering his thoughts. I suppose it comes down to the values I was raised with, he replied slowly. I believe in the worth of every human life, regardless of how someone treats me. And as an EMT, I have a duty to help people in need. In that moment, all I could see was a person who was suffering. I didn't think about what she'd said or how it had hurt. My training took over, and I did what I was there to do. Sarah nodded, her eyes alight with interest. That's incredibly powerful, Marcus. But given the things she said, I imagine there's a part of you that felt conflicted. He chuckled softly, nodding. You're not wrong. I'd be lying if I said it didn't sting. Her words, her assumptions, they cut deep, but I've spent my whole life learning to rise above those kinds of words. I've seen a lot in my life. I grew up seeing the ways people can be hurtful, the damage prejudice can cause. But I also learned the power of compassion. If I let every harsh word or judgment stick with me, I'd be carrying a lot of unnecessary weight. Sarah leaned back, a thoughtful expression on her face. Do you think there's a lesson in this for the community? Something people can take away from your experience? Marcus thought for a moment, choosing his words carefully. I think it's about seeing each other's humanity, even when it's hard. We're all so quick to judge, to assume the worst in people based on what we think we know. But sometimes it takes a simple act of kindness to break down those walls. That's what I hope people take away from this, that no one is beyond compassion. The article that followed was raw and authentic, capturing not only Marcus's perspective, but also the complexities of forgiveness, resilience, and the enduring impact of compassion. Sarah's words struck a chord with readers, and the article spread like wildfire, sparking conversations across the city. The narrative of Marcus's selfless act was inspiring people to reflect on their own biases, to question their assumptions, and to consider the power of forgiveness. 1 week later, as Marcus was finishing a late shift, he received a phone call that would change the course of his involvement in this story. It was the woman from the park. Her voice was different this time. Soft, almost tentative, filled with a vulnerability he hadn't expected. "Marcus," she began, her voice barely a whisper, "I don't know if you'll even want to speak to me, but I need to say something. I've been doing a lot of thinking since that day, and I know I have no right to ask, but would you be willing to meet with me? I need to apologize properly. I want to understand. I want to do better." As he ended the call, Marcus knew this encounter was far from over. The journey was just beginning. The question of forgiveness, change, and the possibility of redemption now hung heavily in the air, not just for her, but for him as well. An unexpected apology. As Marcus walked toward the small cafe where he had agreed to meet the woman from the park, his mind was swirling with a mixture of emotions. It had been several days since their brief, tense phone conversation, and the weight of that call lingered heavily in his heart. Her voice, stripped of the anger and condescension that had defined their initial encounter, had been almost unrecognizable. She sounded raw, almost desperate, seeking a form of atonement he hadn't anticipated. She had asked for a chance to apologize, to explain herself, and despite the bitter memories of that day, Marcus had agreed. The cafe was quiet, a cozy little spot tucked away from the bustling city streets. The soft murmur of conversation and the aroma of freshly brewed coffee created an ambience that felt worlds away from the intensity of their last encounter. Marcus took a seat by the window, his eyes scanning the street for her arrival. He felt a tug of uncertainty. Part of him questioned why he had agreed to this meeting, why he would open himself to hearing what could be another excuse, another denial of responsibility masked as regret. As he waited, he thought about the people who had reached out to him after the incident went viral. Messages of support had poured in from friends, family, colleagues, and even strangers who admired his choice to help despite the woman's hateful words. Some people, however, had voiced the opposite sentiment. They questioned why he had intervened, why he had chosen compassion over a justifiable anger. A few had even told him he should have let her suffer, that people like her didn't deserve kindness. Yet Marcus believed that even people filled with hatred had a chance to change. It was a belief that was rooted in his own experiences, in the lessons he had learned growing up in a neighborhood that often seemed abandoned by society. He had seen people rise from the depths of anger and resentment to become advocates for peace, love, and justice. He knew that change wasn't easy, but he believed it was possible. And maybe, just maybe, this woman could be another example of that possibility. A few minutes later, he saw her. She approached the cafe slowly, her posture hesitant, as if she were unsure whether to go through with the meeting. Her clothes, though still meticulously styled, seemed less ostentatious, and her face was devoid of the polished confidence he had seen before. Instead, her expression was clouded with worry, her gaze shifting anxiously as she looked for him. He raised a hand, and her eyes found his. She gave a slight nod, her face flushing with what looked like embarrassment or shame, and made her way over. When she reached him, she hesitated, then extended her hand. "Marcus," she said quietly, "thank you for meeting me." He shook her hand, noting the tremor in her grip. "Please, have a seat." She sat down across from him, clasping her hands tightly in her lap. She seemed to struggle for words, her gaze occasionally darting up to meet his before she looked down again, as if gathering the courage to speak. I don't really know where to start," she admitted, her voice barely audible. Marcus waited, sensing that she needed space to find her words. He could see her discomfort, the internal struggle playing out in the way her fingers twisted together, the tension in her posture. "I've thought a lot about what happened in the park," she began, her voice shaking slightly. "About the things I said, the way I treated you and that boy. I can't even find the words to tell you how ashamed I am." She took a deep breath, her fingers loosening slightly as she glanced up at him. "I know it doesn't change what I did, but I'm sorry. Truly, deeply sorry. And I know that probably means nothing to you after the things I said. But I needed to tell you that." Marcus studied her face, searching for any hint of insincerity. Instead, he found only regret, her eyes shadowed with guilt and vulnerability. "Why did you say those things?" he asked gently, his voice free of accusation. "What made you so angry?" She swallowed, her hands unclenching as she leaned forward slightly, as if compelled by the weight of her own confession. I think it was fear. Fear, and a lot of things I don't really understand about myself. I'd spent so much time believing certain things about people, and I realize now that it's because of the environment I grew up in, the beliefs that were instilled in me. But that's not an excuse. I chose to believe those things. I chose to act on them." She hesitated, her gaze dropping to her hands. "I was raised in a family where we looked down on people who weren't like us. I never questioned it because it was all I knew. But that day, in the park, I let that hatred spill out of me in a way I didn't even know I was capable of." Marcus listened in silence, letting her words sink in. He had often wondered about the forces that drove people to hate, the influences that molded prejudice into something so powerful it could overshadow basic humanity. Her words, her admission of her upbringing, confirmed what he had always believed, that hatred was often passed down like an unwanted inheritance, shaping people from a young age. "When you collapsed," he said softly, "I didn't think about what you'd said. I only saw someone in need. That's why I helped you." She nodded, blinking back tears. "I know. That's what has been haunting me, Marcus. The fact that you showed me compassion when I'd shown you nothing but hatred. You saved my life, and I had treated you as if you were less than human." A silence fell between them, filled with the weight of her remorse. She took a shuddering breath before speaking again. "I want to change, Marcus," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "I don't want to be that person anymore. But I don't know where to start. I've lived in this bubble of privilege and prejudice for so long. I don't know how to break free of it." Marcus regarded her thoughtfully, feeling the stirrings of empathy despite the bitterness of their initial encounter. He had seen the impact of prejudice up close, in his own life and in the lives of those around him. But he had also witnessed the power of change, the resilience of people who fought to overcome their pasts. "Change is hard," he said, his voice gentle but firm. "It's uncomfortable, and it requires looking at parts of yourself that aren't easy to face. But if you're willing to do the work, to really dig deep and confront your own biases, it's possible. It won't be easy, and it won't happen overnight, but it can be done." She nodded, her gaze fixed on him with an intensity he hadn't expected. "I'm willing. I don't know if I deserve it, but I want to try." Marcus leaned back, crossing his arms as he considered her. Part of him wanted to believe in her sincerity, to give her the benefit of the doubt. But another part, the part that had been hurt by her words, was wary, questioning whether her remorse was genuine or just a product of guilt. He knew that change couldn't be forced. It had to come from within, and it had to be sustained by action, not just words. "If you're serious about this," he said finally, "then you need to start by educating yourself. Read, listen, talk to people who come from different backgrounds. Learn about the experiences of those you've been taught to look down on. And most importantly, examine the assumptions you make about people." She nodded, her expression one of determination. "I will. And I'd like to talk to you too, if you're willing. I don't expect you to forgive me right away, but I'd like to understand what it's like from your perspective, if that's okay." Marcus considered her request. He had never seen himself as an educator, as someone who could guide others on a path to understanding. His life was rooted in service, in action, in helping those in need. But he realized that perhaps this was another way he could serve, by sharing his experiences, by offering a perspective that she had never been exposed to. He could be a part of her journey, a guide if she truly intended to change. "I'll talk with you," he said slowly. "But this can't just be about me. You need to seek out voices from other perspectives as well. I'll give you suggestions, books, resources. But this is your journey, not mine." She nodded again, her eyes filled with a mixture of gratitude and relief. "Thank you, Marcus. I know I have a long way to go, but thank you for giving me a chance to try." As they parted ways, Marcus felt a sense of cautious optimism. He didn't know if her intentions would hold, if she would truly follow through on her promise to change. But for the first time, he saw a flicker of hope, a possibility that their encounter, painful as it had been, could lead to something meaningful. Over the next few weeks, Marcus and the woman, who introduced herself as Catherine, met several more times. True to her word, she threw herself into her education, immersing herself in books on racial history, privilege, and inequality. She attended diversity workshops, listening to the experiences of people from backgrounds vastly different from her own. She even began volunteering at community organizations, helping those who were struggling with the very issues she had once dismissed. Each time they met, Catherine shared her revelations with Marcus, her newfound understanding mixed with a deep remorse for the harm she had caused, both to him and to others. She spoke candidly about the guilt she felt, the painful awareness of how her actions had perpetuated prejudice, and the growing desire to make amends. Marcus listened, sometimes sharing his own experiences, other times offering words of encouragement or advice. He saw the changes in her, the gradual softening of her views, the dismantling of her assumptions. He could tell that the journey was not easy for her. She struggled, stumbled, and often found herself grappling with emotions she had never confronted before. But she kept going, driven by a genuine desire to be better. As the weeks turned into months, Catherine's transformation began to extend beyond her interactions with Marcus. She started to speak out against prejudice, using her platform to raise awareness and advocate for understanding. She connected with people from different communities, building relationships that were once unimaginable to her. Her journey of self-discovery became a public one, inspiring others to confront their own biases, to question the assumptions they had long taken for granted. Marcus watched her journey with a sense of pride, tempered by a lingering skepticism. He knew that change was never a straight path, that there would be setbacks and moments of doubt. But he also knew that she had taken the first, most difficult step, the decision to face herself honestly, to confront the ugliness she had carried for so long. One day, after one of their meetings, Catherine looked at him, her expression earnest. "Marcus," she said softly, "I know this journey isn't over. I know I still have so much to learn, so much to unlearn, but I want you to know that you've changed my life. You showed me compassion when I didn't deserve it, and that's something I'll never forget." Marcus nodded, feeling a warmth spread through him. He had chosen compassion over anger, and now, for the first time, he saw the true power of that choice, a choice that had planted a seed of change in someone who had once been blinded by prejudice. In that moment, he realized that their encounter in the park had been more than just a painful confrontation. It had been the beginning of a journey, not only for Catherine, but for him as well. As they parted, Marcus felt a renewed sense of purpose. He understood now that his actions could create ripples, that even a single act of compassion could ignite a transformation in someone's heart. And as he walked away, he knew that this was only the beginning of a much larger story, one that would continue to unfold in ways he could never have imagined. Seeds of change. Months passed, and the evolution in Catherine's character became visible to everyone around her. Her transformation was not just something she shared in her conversations with Marcus. It was a journey that had become a public narrative, one that extended to her family, her friends, her colleagues, and eventually her entire community. What had started as a solitary and painful confrontation with her own prejudices was now a shared endeavor, inspiring others to reflect on their own beliefs and biases. Marcus witnessed this change with a mixture of pride and cautious optimism. He had come to know Catherine in ways he hadn't expected. She had initially seemed to him like someone irredeemably blinded by ignorance and entitlement, but he now saw a person stripped of those layers, actively working to rebuild her understanding of the world. Her transformation, though fraught with struggles and setbacks, had become a testament to the potential for change, a reminder that no matter how deeply rooted prejudice might be, there was always a way to uproot it. One Saturday afternoon, Catherine invited Marcus to speak with a small group she had organized, people from her social circle, most of whom had known her for years. Marcus wasn't sure what to expect, but he agreed, sensing that this was another step in Catherine's journey. The group met in the quiet lounge of a community center, and Marcus found himself facing a diverse array of expressions: curiosity, hesitation, discomfort, and, in a few cases, thinly veiled skepticism. These were people who had known Catherine in her former life, who had perhaps shared in her perspectives, and even supported the prejudices she had once harbored. And now, they were here, at her invitation, prepared to listen. Catherine introduced Marcus to the group, her voice filled with a surprising mixture of pride and humility. "Marcus," she said, gesturing for him to take a seat, "is the person who, despite every reason to walk away, chose to help me on one of the worst days of my life. He saved me, not just physically, but in a way that's hard to put into words. And I'm grateful that he's here today, willing to share his perspective with all of us." The group exchanged glances, some nodding, others looking away. Marcus could feel the tension in the room, but he also felt a sense of purpose. He had never been one to seek the spotlight, yet here he was, an unexpected advocate, a symbol of compassion in a conversation that had long needed to happen. As he looked around the room, he took a deep breath and began. "I'm grateful to be here. I didn't know what to expect today, but I think it's important that we have conversations like this. What happened between Catherine and me in the park was difficult. Her words hurt, but in the end, I chose to help her because I believe that everyone deserves compassion, even when it's hard. Especially when it's hard." A middle-aged man seated near the front raised his hand, his expression guarded. "Marcus, I respect what you did, but I have to ask, why would you choose to help her after the things she said? Isn't that letting her off the hook?" Marcus paused, considering his response. It was a question he had wrestled with himself. "I don't see it that way. I chose to help because it's who I am. If I had walked away, I would have been carrying that decision with me for the rest of my life." Choosing compassion didn't mean excusing her behavior. It meant choosing to rise above it. And I think that's what we need more of, especially now. Another person, a woman in her 30s, chimed in. "Catherine told us about her journey, about the things she's been learning and how much she's had to confront in herself. I know her, and I believe she's sincere, but I'm struggling to understand how someone can change so drastically. Can people really transform like that?" Marcus nodded, acknowledging the woman's skepticism. "It's a valid question. Change is hard. It's uncomfortable, and it doesn't happen overnight. But I've seen it, time and time again. People change when they're willing to look honestly at themselves, to confront the things they don't like, and to actively work on becoming better. Catherine's journey isn't over. It's a process. And like any process, it has its ups and downs." He glanced at Catherine, who was listening intently, her gaze unwavering. "What's important is that she's doing the work. She's not looking for forgiveness just to feel better about herself. She's working to understand why she acted the way she did and how to prevent it from happening again. Change doesn't mean we forget what happened. It means we build something better from it." The group fell silent, each person processing his words. Marcus could feel the atmosphere shifting, a sense of understanding settling over the room. He continued to share stories from his life, from his work, recounting moments that highlighted the strength of resilience, the power of compassion, and the importance of challenging prejudice. He spoke openly about the hardships he had faced, the injustices he had endured, and the moments when he had felt the weight of the world pressing down on him. And as he spoke, he could see the expressions of the group softening, their initial defenses crumbling in the face of his honest vulnerability. After the gathering, several people approached him to thank him, their words tinged with a newfound respect and gratitude. Some even shared their own stories, moments when they had witnessed or experienced prejudice, expressing regret for their silence or complicity. Marcus listened, offering words of encouragement, and in those exchanges, he sensed a shift, a small but significant opening in the minds of those who had come. Catherine walked him out to his car afterward, her expression a mixture of gratitude and determination. "Marcus," she said, her voice trembling slightly, "I can't thank you enough. You didn't just help me. You helped all of us today." He smiled, his gaze steady. "This is just the beginning, Catherine. Change isn't a destination. It's a journey. You've taken the first steps, but there's a long road ahead. Just remember, it's not about proving yourself to anyone else. It's about being true to the person you want to become." She nodded, her eyes filled with gratitude. "Thank you, Marcus, for everything." As Marcus drove home, he felt a sense of fulfillment unlike anything he had experienced before. This journey with Catherine had become more than just a story of reconciliation. It was a catalyst for change, a reminder of the power of connection in a world often divided by fear and misunderstanding. But their work was far from over. A few weeks later, the local newspaper published an article on Catherine's journey. It was written by Sarah Miller, the journalist who had covered Marcus's story after the incident in the park. She had followed Catherine's transformation closely, attending her community gatherings, witnessing her interactions, and documenting her efforts to advocate for equality. The article was candid, detailing not only Catherine's progress, but also her struggles, the moments of doubt, and the resistance she faced from those who doubted her sincerity. The article sparked a flurry of reactions in the community. Many people expressed admiration for Catherine's journey, praising her courage to confront her past and her commitment to change. Others, however, remained skeptical, questioning her motives and the authenticity of her transformation. Some even accused her of seeking attention, dismissing her efforts as a shallow attempt to redeem her reputation. Marcus saw the comments online, the vitriol mixed with encouragement, and felt a pang of disappointment. He knew that change, especially of this magnitude, would always be met with doubt. It was human nature to question the motives of those who sought redemption, to wonder whether people could truly change or if they were simply putting on a facade. But he also knew that Catherine's journey was real, that her remorse, her dedication, her willingness to engage in uncomfortable conversations were genuine. In response to the article, Marcus decided to reach out to Sarah, suggesting a follow-up story. He wanted people to understand that Catherine's transformation was not just a personal journey. It was part of a broader effort to build bridges, to encourage dialogue, to inspire others to question their own biases. Sarah, intrigued by Marcus' perspective, agreed to his suggestion, and together they began working on a piece that would highlight the importance of empathy, the power of forgiveness, and the potential for change. The new article, titled "The Path to Redemption: A Community's Journey," delved into the impact of Catherine's transformation on the community. It featured interviews with people who had attended her gatherings, stories of those who had been inspired by her efforts, and reflections from Marcus on the challenges and rewards of forgiveness. The article painted a picture of a community grappling with its own prejudices, forced to confront uncomfortable truths and acknowledge the complexities of change. The response was overwhelming. People from all walks of life reached out to Marcus and Catherine, sharing their own stories of prejudice, forgiveness, and transformation. Local organizations invited them to speak at events, schools requested workshops on diversity and inclusion, and community leaders sought their input on initiatives to address racial inequality. What had begun as a painful encounter in a park had blossomed into a movement, a ripple effect that touched lives in ways neither Marcus nor Catherine could have imagined. As the weeks turned into months, Marcus found himself at the forefront of a community-wide dialogue on race, compassion, and justice. He became a sought-after speaker, sharing his story with schools, churches, and community centers, encouraging others to engage in meaningful conversations about prejudice and understanding. Catherine joined him, sharing her own journey, her mistakes, and her commitment to change. Together, they became symbols of hope, proof that transformation was possible even in the most unexpected places. Their work was not without challenges. They encountered resistance, skepticism, and criticism from those who doubted their sincerity, who questioned the depth of their commitment. But they continued, undeterred, driven by a shared belief in the power of compassion, the resilience of the human spirit, and the potential for forgiveness to heal even the deepest wounds. One evening, after a particularly powerful community event, Marcus and Catherine sat together on the steps of the community center, watching the sun dip below the horizon. The crowd had dispersed, the echoes of applause fading into the quiet of the night, and a peaceful silence settled over them. Catherine turned to Marcus, her expression thoughtful. "I never thought this would be my life. I never imagined I'd be here, doing this work, speaking out against the very beliefs I once held." Marcus smiled, his gaze warm. "That's the beauty of change. It takes us places we never thought we'd go. And it shows us parts of ourselves we never knew existed." She nodded, her eyes glistening with emotion. "I owe so much of this to you. Your compassion, your forgiveness. It saved me, Marcus. It gave me a chance to be better." Marcus looked at her, his expression gentle yet firm. "You saved yourself, Catherine. I just reminded you of what was possible. The rest was all you." As they sat together, watching the last rays of sunlight fade into twilight, Marcus felt a sense of peace settle over him. He had chosen compassion over anger, forgiveness over resentment, and in doing so, he had ignited a transformation that had spread far beyond himself, touching lives and inspiring change in ways he could never have foreseen. For the first time in a long time, he felt a deep, abiding hope for the future, a hope rooted in the belief that, despite the darkness, humanity had the capacity for growth, understanding, and boundless compassion. Ripples across the community. As Marcus and Catherine's story gained traction, their efforts began to reshape not only their own lives, but the lives of countless others throughout the city. What had started as a painful, singular confrontation between two people had evolved into a community-wide awakening. People from all backgrounds, teachers, students, business owners, parents, activists, were now engaging in dialogues that had long been avoided, confronting biases that had previously gone unchallenged. With every speaking engagement and community event, Marcus felt the weight of his role grow. He was no longer just an EMT performing acts of service in the quiet moments of people's lives. He had become a symbol, a bridge builder, someone who embodied the power of empathy and resilience. Catherine, too, was no longer just an individual seeking redemption. She had transformed into an advocate for social change, using her voice to challenge the very beliefs she had once upheld. Together, they were challenging an entire community to rethink its perceptions and prejudices. Their influence began to reach the youth in particular. Schools across the city invited them to speak, and as they stood before students in crowded auditoriums and classrooms, Marcus could feel the magnitude of their impact. He looked into the faces of students who were seeing these issues through fresh eyes, many of whom had never seen people like Marcus and Catherine talk openly about topics that often simmered beneath the surface. These young minds were impressionable, and for Marcus, this was an opportunity to inspire a new generation to stand against hatred and embrace the diversity around them. One day, after speaking at a local high school, Marcus was approached by a young student named Javier. Javier was quiet, his eyes downcast, his demeanor shy but respectful. He waited until the crowd around Marcus had thinned before stepping forward. "Mr. Johnson," Javier began, his voice barely above a whisper. "I just wanted to thank you. Hearing you talk about compassion, it meant a lot to me. I've been bullied because of where I come from. And sometimes it's hard to believe there are people who care." Marcus knelt down so he could look Javier in the eyes. "Javier, it takes courage to face people who don't understand us, who judge us unfairly. But remember, their words don't define you. You define yourself. And there are people out there, people like me, people like Catherine, who believe in you, who care about you." Javier's eyes filled with tears, and he nodded, visibly moved. "Thank you, sir. I want to be like you someday." The interaction with Javier stayed with Marcus long after he left the school. It reminded him of his own childhood, of the struggles he had faced growing up in a community that was often overlooked, stigmatized, and misunderstood. He knew that many of the kids he met were dealing with similar challenges, fighting battles of self-worth and identity that were invisible to most adults. It was a reminder that the work he and Catherine were doing extended far beyond individual redemption. It was about creating a legacy of empathy, a foundation of understanding for the next generation. Catherine, too, found herself reflecting on her impact, especially when she spoke to groups of women and young people from affluent backgrounds similar to her own. Her journey had forced her to confront uncomfortable truths about privilege, about the subtle ways prejudice is passed down, often disguised as traditional values or preserving culture. These realizations had been painful, but they were also liberating. She knew now that privilege wasn't something to hide behind. It was a responsibility, an opportunity to create positive change. One evening, Catherine was invited to speak at a gathering hosted by a local women's organization, a group that had known her for years as a businesswoman and socialite, but had little insight into her transformation. As she took the stage, she saw familiar faces, people she had once considered close friends, some of whom had distanced themselves as her journey unfolded. They looked at her with a mixture of skepticism and curiosity, and Catherine felt a pang of nervousness. She was about to challenge many of the beliefs they had all grown up with, ideas that had been woven into their lives for generations. Taking a deep breath, she began, her voice trembling at first, but gaining strength as she spoke. "I'm here tonight because I've been on a journey I never expected to take, and it's a journey that has changed me in ways I can't fully explain. For most of my life, I saw the world through a narrow lens. I believed certain things about people who weren't like me, ideas that I never questioned because they were comfortable. But comfort is dangerous. It allows us to sit in ignorance, to shield ourselves from the truth." She paused, her gaze sweeping across the audience. "I hurt someone because of my ignorance. I said things, I acted in ways that I'm deeply ashamed of. But in that moment, someone showed me compassion. Marcus Johnson, someone who had every reason to walk away, to let me suffer, chose to help me instead. That act of kindness was a mirror, forcing me to confront the person I had become. And I'm here today because I don't want anyone else to live in that ignorance, to carry that hatred. We have a choice. We can change." Her words hung in the air, resonating with an authenticity that silenced even the skeptics. As she stepped down from the stage, she felt a weight lift from her shoulders. She had exposed herself, laid bare her flaws and regrets, and in doing so, she had offered those in the audience an invitation to look within themselves, to question the assumptions they had taken for granted. In the days that followed, Catherine received messages from women who had attended the event. Some thanked her, expressing their own struggles with prejudice, sharing their desire to be better. Others were less supportive, accusing her of betraying her upbringing, of trying to make them feel guilty for things that weren't their problem. Catherine read each message carefully, her heart heavy with the knowledge that change was difficult, that not everyone would be ready to embrace the path she had taken. But she remained undeterred, committed to the journey she had started, no matter the obstacles. As the year went on, Marcus and Catherine became more deeply involved in the community's efforts to promote understanding and inclusivity. They organized workshops, partnered with local organizations, and spoke at events that addressed issues ranging from racial inequality to economic disparity. They also began to collaborate with schools, advocating for curricula that included diverse perspectives and taught students the importance of empathy, respect, and resilience. During one of their community meetings, a middle-aged man named Leonard approached them. Leonard had been a police officer in the city for over 2 decades, and he had seen the toll that prejudice, poverty, and mistrust had taken on the community. His face was etched with lines of fatigue, his expression one of weariness mixed with hope. "I wanted to thank you both for what you're doing," Leonard said, his voice gravelly but sincere. "I've seen a lot in my time on the force, good and bad. And I'll be honest, there were times when I didn't believe people could change. But seeing the two of you working together, it's given me hope. And I want to be part of this. I want to help make this community a place where people don't have to fear each other." His words touched Marcus deeply. Growing up, he had often viewed law enforcement with a sense of mistrust, shaped by the experiences of people in his community. But Leonard's openness, his willingness to listen and join the movement for change, reminded Marcus that healing required efforts from all sides. If people like Leonard could engage in the conversation, it meant that progress was truly possible. Together, Marcus, Catherine, and Leonard began organizing dialogues between community members and local law enforcement. These events were tense at first, with years of resentment and fear bubbling to the surface. But as people began to share their stories, to listen and empathize, something shifted. Walls that had long divided them started to crumble, replaced by a tentative but genuine willingness to understand one another. In one of these sessions, a young man named Tyrone spoke up. He was from Marcus's neighborhood and had experienced numerous encounters with law enforcement that left him feeling dehumanized and criminalized. His voice shook with anger and pain as he recounted those experiences, the times he had been stopped, questioned, and treated with suspicion simply because of where he lived and the color of his skin. As Tyrone spoke, Leonard listened intently, his expression solemn. When Tyrone finished, Leonard cleared his throat, looking directly at him. "Tyrone, I can't undo the hurt you've experienced. I know there's a history of mistrust, and I'm part of an institution that has contributed to that. But I'm here because I want to change that. I want to be someone who protects and serves, not someone who makes people feel less than. And I'm sorry for what you've been through. I hope you'll allow me, and others on the force, the chance to earn back that trust." The room fell silent, and Marcus watched as Tyrone's hardened expression softened, a flicker of hope shining through his guarded demeanor. It was a powerful moment, a reminder that healing was possible, even in the face of deep-seated pain. For Marcus, it was further proof that the journey he had started with Catherine was spreading, igniting change in places he had once thought unreachable. Over time, the city itself began to transform. Inspired by the work Marcus and Catherine were doing, local businesses implemented diversity and sensitivity training for their employees. Schools incorporated new materials into their curricula that celebrated different cultures and histories. Community centers became hubs of activity, hosting events that fostered dialogue, understanding, and solidarity among people from all backgrounds. Through it all, Marcus and Catherine continued their work, tireless in their commitment to building a better world. They faced challenges, of course. There were people who resisted, who clung to old beliefs and biases. But each act of kindness, each conversation, each bridge they built reminded them that change was a marathon, not a sprint. Their journey was ongoing, a testament to the resilience of the human spirit, the power of forgiveness, and the possibility of transformation. One evening, after a particularly impactful community event, Catherine and Marcus walked through the now familiar streets of the neighborhood, reflecting on all that had happened since that fateful day in the park. They had become more than partners in this work. They had become friends, bound by a shared purpose and an unbreakable bond. "You know, Marcus," Catherine said softly, her gaze fixed on the skyline, "I never would have believed that a single act of kindness could change so much. But here we are. You saved my life in more ways than one." Marcus smiled, his gaze warm. "You changed yourself, Catherine. I was just there to remind you what was possible. The rest was all you." They stood there in the quiet, each lost in their own thoughts, grateful for the journey that had brought them together. They knew that there was still work to be done, challenges to face, minds to open. But they also knew that they had come too far to turn back. Their journey was a beacon of hope for others, a reminder that even the smallest acts of compassion could create ripples of change that transformed entire communities. As they looked out over the city, they felt a sense of peace, knowing that the future was bright, filled with the promise of a world where empathy, understanding, and love could prevail. And they knew that, no matter the challenges ahead, they would face them together, united by a purpose that was larger than themselves. The legacy of compassion. Months turned into a year, and the work that Marcus and Catherine had initiated continued to ripple through the community, inspiring more people to engage in conversations about prejudice, empathy, and justice. What had once been an isolated incident in a quiet park had grown into a full-fledged movement, with organizations, schools, and even local government officials backing initiatives that promoted inclusivity and equity. The effects of their work reached beyond their city limits as their story gained attention from national media. Journalists, activists, and community leaders from across the country began to take notice. Invitations to speak came pouring in, and both Marcus and Catherine found themselves traveling to share their journey, their lessons, and their unwavering belief in the power of compassion. Yet despite the attention and accolades, they remained grounded, committed to the local work that had brought them together in the first place. The attention was not without its challenges, however. With the increased visibility came criticism from skeptics who questioned the sincerity of Catherine's transformation and Marcus's willingness to forgive. On social media, some people accused Catherine of seeking fame, while others criticized Marcus for forgiving too easily or playing the hero. It stung, especially for Catherine, who was still wrestling with the burden of her past and the impact of her previous prejudices. But each time these doubts surfaced, Marcus reminded her of the journey she had undertaken, the real, often painful work of self-reflection, growth, and accountability. In response to the critics, Catherine decided to take her transparency to a new level. She organized a public forum, inviting community members to ask her questions, to hold her accountable, and to share their thoughts openly. It was a bold move, one that she approached with both dread and determination. She understood that this was part of her commitment to change. It was her way of showing the world that her transformation wasn't about seeking validation, but about being willing to confront the consequences of her past. The forum was held in a large auditorium, and the atmosphere was tense, a mix of curiosity and skepticism. Catherine took the stage alone, standing beneath the bright lights as she faced an audience filled with both supporters and skeptics. She felt exposed, vulnerable, but she also felt a deep sense of purpose. She began by sharing her story, recounting her journey from the hateful confrontation in the park to the hard-won self-awareness that had reshaped her life. She spoke about the mistakes she had made, the pain she had caused, and the many conversations with Marcus that had challenged her to become a better person. As she spoke, her voice wavered, but she didn't shy away from the difficult parts. She owned her past actions and acknowledged the harm they had inflicted, both on individuals and on the broader community. When she opened the floor to questions, a young black woman in the audience stood up, her gaze unwavering. "Why should we believe you?" the woman asked, her tone a mixture of anger and hurt. "How do we know this isn't just a way for you to feel better about yourself? To ease your guilt?" Catherine took a deep breath, feeling the weight of the woman's question. It was a question she had asked herself countless times. She looked directly at the young woman, her voice steady. "You have every right to question me. I can't erase the harm I caused, and I don't expect you to forgive me or believe me because I say I've changed. All I can do is show you, through my actions, my commitment, and my willingness to be held accountable. This isn't about my comfort. It's about making amends and helping to build a world where no one has to experience the prejudice I once upheld." The young woman nodded slowly, her expression softening just a fraction. Catherine could see that while she hadn't fully won the woman's trust, she had at least opened a door. Throughout the evening, people asked difficult, often painful questions. Some were angry, others simply skeptical, and a few shared their own experiences of discrimination and mistrust. Catherine listened to each question with humility and patience, responding with honesty and a willingness to acknowledge her flaws. She didn't try to justify her past. She accepted it, recognizing that her role was to listen, to learn, and to continue doing the work. By the end of the forum, the energy in the room had shifted. Catherine could feel it, a quiet understanding, a recognition of her sincerity. Though not everyone was convinced, she had taken a significant step, one that solidified her commitment to change in the eyes of the community. Meanwhile, Marcus's work continued to grow. He had become not only a figure of compassion, but a mentor and advocate for the youth in his community. He spent his evenings volunteering at a local center for at-risk youth, helping to create programs that focused on self-worth, resilience, and empathy. His goal was to reach kids before prejudice and hatred could sink into their hearts, to give them the tools they needed to rise above the challenges they faced. One of these young people was a boy named Malik, a 16-year-old who had been in and out of trouble since he was 12. Marcus recognized in Malik the same struggles he had once faced, the pull of the streets, the allure of quick solutions in a world that offered little hope. Malik was smart, capable, but angry, a simmering anger that Marcus understood all too well. During their first meeting, Malik was defensive, his gaze defiant. He had heard about Marcus's story, but he was skeptical. To him, it seemed like another tale of someone trying to fix him without understanding the realities he faced. "What's in this for you, man?" Malik asked, his tone challenging. "Why do you even care?" Marcus didn't flinch. "I care because I was once where you are, Malik. I know what it feels like to be angry, to feel like the world's stacked against you. But I also know that there's a different path. It's not easy, and it's not quick, but it's real. And if you're willing, I'm here to help you find it." For weeks, Malik resisted, showing up reluctantly, sometimes not at all. But Marcus was patient, never pushing too hard, always reminding him that the door was open. Gradually, Malik began to show up more regularly, participating in discussions, asking questions, opening up. Marcus could see the shift in him, a slow but steady transformation as Malik began to believe in his own potential. One night, after a long session at the youth center, Malik approached Marcus with a hesitant expression. "Mr. Johnson," he began, his voice soft, "I don't know where I'd be if you hadn't reached out to me. I know I gave you a hard time, but I'm grateful." Marcus smiled, placing a hand on Malik's shoulder. "You're doing the work, Malik. I'm just here to remind you that you're capable of more than you know." For Marcus, these moments were his true reward. He saw in each young person he mentored a glimpse of his own journey, a reminder of the power of compassion to break cycles of despair and replace them with hope. As the anniversary of their initial encounter in the park approached, Catherine suggested they organize a community event to celebrate the progress they had made. She envisioned a day of unity, a gathering where people from all walks of life could come together, share stories, and reaffirm their commitment to empathy and understanding. Marcus agreed, seeing it as an opportunity to reinforce the bonds they had worked so hard to build. They chose a large park in the heart of the city and invited everyone: families, students, local leaders, activists, business owners, and anyone who had been touched by their journey. They called it the Day of Compassion, a celebration of unity, resilience, and the transformative power of forgiveness. The event was a resounding success. People from all backgrounds came together, filling the park with laughter, music, and conversation. Booths were set up by local organizations promoting social justice, mental health, youth programs, and other initiatives that had grown out of the movement Marcus and Catherine had started. There were activities for children, panels on racial equality, workshops on cultural sensitivity, and open dialogues where people could share their stories and experiences. Marcus and Catherine took the stage together to address the crowd, their voices filled with emotion as they reflected on the journey that had brought them to this moment. 1 year ago, Marcus began, looking out over the crowd. I was faced with a choice. I could have walked away, let anger and hurt dictate my actions. But I chose compassion. And that choice has led us here, to a day when we can come together, as a community, to celebrate what we've built together. Catherine spoke next, her voice steady but filled with emotion. I have learned more in this past year than I did in a lifetime. I've learned that growth is painful, that change requires courage, and that the hardest thing we can do is confront ourselves honestly. But I also learned that forgiveness is possible, that we can be better. And I am grateful for every person here who has been part of that journey. The crowd erupted in applause, a standing ovation that filled the air with a sense of unity and hope. Marcus and Catherine stood together, overwhelmed by the support and gratitude radiating from the people before them. It was a powerful reminder of the impact they had made, a testament to the resilience of the human spirit and the boundless potential for change. As the event continued, Marcus and Catherine mingled with the crowd, shaking hands, listening to stories, and sharing moments of laughter and reflection. They saw the faces of people they had touched, young and old, each one a testament to the legacy they had created. There were familiar faces, like Leonard, the police officer who had become a strong advocate for change, and new faces, people drawn to the movement, inspired by the stories they had heard. As the sun began to set, Marcus and Catherine stood side by side, watching as families packed up their picnic blankets, children played in the fading light, and people lingered, reluctant to leave the warmth of the day. You know, Catherine, Marcus said softly, this is what I hoped for. Not fame, not recognition, but this, a community where people can come together, where we can all be better. Catherine nodded, a tear slipping down her cheek. I never thought I'd see this. I never thought I could be part of something like this. But you showed me it was possible. And for that, Marcus, I will always be grateful. They stood in silence, soaking in the beauty of the moment, knowing that their journey was far from over. There would be more challenges, more conversations, more battles to fight. But they also knew that they had laid a foundation, built on compassion, forgiveness, and an unwavering belief in the power of transformation. As they watched the last of the crowd disperse, Marcus felt a profound sense of peace settle over him. This was more than just an event, more than a movement. It was a legacy, one that would outlive them both, inspiring generations to come, reminding people that no matter how deep the divisions, no matter how strong the prejudice, there was always a way forward. And in that moment, beneath the fading light of a day filled with unity and hope, Marcus and Catherine knew that they had changed the world, one act of compassion at a time.